Welcome to the Mobile Hunters Dojo. Take a seat on the mat and get ready to learn from today's best mobile hunting masters. I'm your host, the White Belt Sensei, Matt Lear. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at the Mobile Hunters Dojo. All right, welcome back, everybody. Kick off your shoes and take a seat on the mat. We have a good one for you today. I'm talking to an absolute killer, Chris Weist. Did I say your last name correct?
Yes, sir.
Man, I hate last names. Every single one of my podcasts, you hear me go, did I say your last name correct? Because I'm just so paranoid about getting it wrong from everybody. Mine, people say mine like three different ways, so I don't even care when they say it wrong. But anyways, hey, Chris, man, I really appreciate you jumping on here. We got to talk on Instagram a couple times. I've been following you for a really long time, actually. And then we got to meet at the All-American Outdoor Show over in PA. And that was awesome. The few minutes that we got to talk, it was crazy busy there. But I've really enjoyed watching your content on Instagram. And what really sent out like the invite to do this is you were breaking down like a setup of yours that when I was looking at it, and maybe I'll ask questions about it a little bit later. When I was looking at it, it just looked like open woods, and then you were talking about this small little dip in the terrain, and it moved these deer over into this area. And I think there might even been like, I can't recall, there might even been like a dead tree that kind of moved them a little bit. And you were talking about like the details of that setup. And I was thinking to myself, I would have walked right past that. Like there's no way I would have caught that, you know? And I would have thought, oh, that's a little bit of open right there. I'm not even going to pay attention to it. I'm going right to the thick. So once I saw that, I really started paying attention to some of your teachings, and I'm like, man, this dude's on another level. So, anyways, Chris, why don't you welcome to the dojo, and why don't you give a little bit of a background of where you're at, what you're hunting?
Yeah, dude, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. Um, so I was just like, a lot of other guys grew up hunting with my dad and he got me started. And then once I got a couple bucks under my belt, and just like all other guys, I get that drive to try to kill something better and been learning from there ever since. And now just like you said, I like to make the breakdown videos and stuff. And I'm always in the woods scouting and trying to find that next big buck.
Yeah, and you're pretty good at finding them, so that's pretty awesome. And you're hunting multiple states every year. Or is that like kind of normal for you for doing like 2 or 3 states a year?
Yeah, the last like 3, 4 years it has been. Yeah, but I kind of make like a triangle out of it. There's like Pennsylvania and Maryland, West Virginia, Ohio, and then like we talked this year, I'm gonna make a trip out west here this year, so that'll be different.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, what kind of is the terrain similar in all those states? Or are you jumping around different terrain?
Uh, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and West Virginia, where I've been poking around, is all pretty big mountain ground, so those are similar. And then Ohio is a pretty big hill country. That's how I would uh, define it, anyhow.
Yeah, it's funny when I hear you East Coast guys talk about like mountain and hill country. To me, like hills, like the hills that you guys talk about are mountains to me. Like I look at it like hills here, like in Michigan, are these little like they look like hills, but hills down in like Ohio look like mountains to me. I can only imagine like what a mountain looks like to you guys because that's got to be insane. But so you're hunting elevation. How long you been hunting in the hills for your entire career or the mountains?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I live here, right at the base of the mountain. This is what I've hunted my whole life, so that's just what I know.
Yeah,
Not that I wanted to say, hey, I'm gonna go hunt mountains and get good at it. That's just what I know.
yeah. That's awesome, man. Well, I can't wait to dive in here, man. I really appreciate it. We were talking about off air and just over the last couple of days, just talking about you know breaking down some sign that people might be overlooking. And again, I go back to that clip where for me, for someone who does a lot of pre-scouting, And I try to find that I guess more micro sign. The fact that that little tiny dip in that terrain and how it moved the deer over there, um, you would have thought I would have known that, but I was just so in awe of like, holy cow, man, this guy is getting some micro sign and really getting down there. I think for a lot of people who are not as experienced as you are, who haven't had as much success as you, we all are kind of looking at the basic stuff, right? We're looking at, a scrape, we're looking at rubs, we're looking at runs. And I think now people are starting to dive into the betting piece of it. But I think for most of us, it's still on that general level. Like, okay, I can recognize a scrape, but what's that scrape telling me? So I think just from watching your content, scrapes are a big part of your game, aren't they?
Absolutely. Yep. I love them. A little bit obsessed with them, actually, probably.
All right, man. So what what makes a scrape good, and what is a scrape that you just walk by? Like, is there a difference?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, just for example, if I get into a new piece, if there's 25 scrapes, I'm probably walking by like 22 of them. But it's
All right.
just everything is such location based for me. And then it has to have the details that I want to see. Um, a lot of guys say, we'll just start with like the ground because the first thing that people see visually when they walk through the woods is the scrape on the ground, right? It's the first thing they see is open dirt. So if you start there, the size can matter, but in some cases it doesn't matter. Then that's where you move to the licking branch. Now the licking branch is going to tell you if it could be in a good location and still not be a great scrape. And I say that because of the licking branch. If you have really big, like I don't know, I got big hands. So for like me, my pointer finger or like my thumb, if I have something that size snapped off, there's a good deer in there. And it takes, and especially the height, right? So I'm like 6'4", and just like these 2 or 3 past scouting trips I was on, I found two of these scrapes that I'm looking for. And a lot of times it's because it's so high. Like there's 7 foot licking branches. Obviously that deer has some headgear, right? So those are tall tales that there's a good deer in the area. And so I'll be looking at the licking branch. Um, the size of the scrape doesn't matter, but I'm definitely gonna, no matter how big it is, I'm gonna be taking at least trying to move some leaves out of the way and looking for track size. And now that's a good indicator, but it doesn't always tell the entire story because I've physically seen big deer walk through a piece and like I walk over to like see the track and they don't have a big hoof. Like you almost would be able to tell the difference between that buck's hoof and a doe's hoof. I've seen that before. But then other bucks, I could fit damn near my whole hand in it. You know what I mean? They have like a 4 or 5 finger wide track. So tracks are a big thing, and the licking branch is the main thing as far as the two components between the ground and the licking branch. But the location is the most important. So the location, obviously, it needs to be in an area where one of two things are going to happen. You either need it in a spot where you can monitor it with a camera, maybe get some intel, some dates on that when the deer start to visit it. They don't necessarily have to be in the daylight for inventory if you're just looking to see what's in the area. But if you're looking for a scrape to actually kill a buck over, uh, I'm in PA, so we'll just call a mature buck 3 years or older, right? Um, and it's got to be in a place where that deer feels safe, where he can enter that scrape in a safe position and also exit. So it's got to be thick enough and close enough or adjacent to thicker cover where there's some bedding at. And you'll find these all over the place. Sometimes they're in spots where there's a lot of thermal pull, where a lot of things come together. There could be a scrape in a spot just on the downwind side of doe bedding where a buck can kill two birds with one stone, basically. He's coming across parallel. He's catching thermals. He's catching wind coming out of these doe bedding areas. And he's cutting doe trails that are traveling the opposite direction in. And he can hit that scrape or he can travel downwind of that scrape and he can actually check that without even physically walking to it.
Yeah.
I could keep it on a rabbit hole. I'll try to keep it as simple as I can.
No, no, it's okay. You can keep going because I'll come back and try to like because when I hear guys like you talk, there's like I'm like, man, I've never thought about that stuff right there. And I know, like, okay, I think I can relate to a lot of my listeners, is what I'm trying to say. So I think I can like bring it deck down to like maybe blue belt level, like you're a black belt. When we're talking
Mhm.
about the dojo, I can probably break it down for blue belt for them. So I'm going to try to do that really quick. Or actually, I'm going to ask a clarifying question. Or actually, I'm going to make a statement. So you're hunting. What I love about you is you're actually hunting a PA, which I think is starting to look pretty good now. But I mean, you guys have had 20 years worth of like restrictions and all that kind of stuff, but you're still not. Yeah, well, let me clarify. You, you're not considered a big buck state yet, and so I think I've talked to a few guys from PA. 120-inch buck's a good buck. Their
Mhm.
130
Yeah,
inch buck is
definitely.
is really phenomenal. So I love that because a lot of times when we're in conversation, guys are talking about 150, 180-inch buck. And when I hear that conversation, I start to check out a little bit because I'm like, all right, like that's not my norm. And so then I wonder like how applicable this is. I think the thing to remember is, okay, so let's just say your area is high pressured. You may not be looking for that scrape that has, that like you said, thumb size, licking branch. It might be slightly smaller than that, but you can compare it to all the other scrapes that you've seen. You're looking for the scrape that has the largest licking branch or some of these bigger details in it. So I don't want guys to write this off and be like, well, that dude's a big buck slayer and I live over here and the biggest thing I have is a 2.5-year-old buck. Well, okay, fine. Find that 2.5-year-old buck sign. It's still going to be applicable. It might not be as big as the sign that you're seeing, but also, that being said, is I guarantee you there is a bigger buck there. And if you do find that sign on your property, then you're really in the money. And you're probably on the biggest buck in that area if you're in a high pressure state. So, like for me in Michigan, I think last year I scouted 200 acres, or excuse me, 200 miles, and I had probably 100 scrapes, and majority of them were just like junk scrapes, like little licking branches and nothing big. But I bet you I found 4 or 5 that were significant. And then putting cameras on those later on, I found some big bucks that people didn't think were in there. So I just want to reiterate, like I think this is like a key piece for guys who might not yet been able to get consistency or get that big buck on the wall. There is this thing out there, and if you search hard enough, you're going to find it. And what you were talking about is the location of these scrapes. This isn't like you're not finding these in like wide open woods with no cover, like you're finding them more closer to thick bedding. Now, when you talk about bedding, is it buck bedding or is it doe bedding or is it both that you're finding these scrapes close to bedding? Or is there a difference
So,
between buck bedding and doe bedding?
right before we jump into that, just let me clarify. There isn't a one set thing with the lick and branch. I think there's two components to that. So I look for the size. Like the size is going to sell me, but if it doesn't have the size, but it's still like 6, 7 foot tall, then you're still looking at a big deer, right? It could go both ways. So, but if you combine those two, then it's a sure thing, right?
Yeah.
So I'll just give like one example. If you would have a really high licking branch and like the branches that are broken aren't as big as like I would like them to be. But if I find big rubs or certain types of rubs in relation, then that's another factor that's like, okay, maybe I shouldn't overlook this because I've heard other guys say this too. And I agree. Sometimes, man, there are certain scrapes that might not make sense, but that buck will throw you for a loop. You know what I mean? He'll be there. There'll be a
Yeah.
big one on him and one you don't expect. So it just takes woodsmanship. You just got to play around.
There is no way around that, right? Like it
Right,
takes it
right.
takes woodsmanship. It's funny, I do a podcast, but you're actually not going to learn it by listening to this podcast. It's going to give you an idea, but you've got to get out there and put boots on the ground and you're probably not going to get this down the first time you go out looking for a scrape either, right? Like, I mean, you could get lucky, you could find this, but it's going to take time running on different scrapes and picking the wrong one and picking the right one and then breaking down that data to really like sealed in your mind what's a good scrape and what's not a good scrape.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I basically learned all this from just trial and error, running cameras on scrapes that was like, well, that's junk. Well, why was it junk? What's this one have compared to this one over here that I got all these pictures on? And it just starts to add up over time. You know what I mean? You figure that stuff out.
And that's the
But
key. That's the key to it, though, on all of it, right? Is asking those questions, and it does take studying the data that you're getting in and what you're seeing, what you're not seeing. It's those questions that actually elevate people to the next level. Instead of just finding it, going, okay, I got scrape check, I've got this check. It's fully understanding, well, why? Why does this one work? Why it doesn't work? And studying that stuff that you're coming across. The next thing I'll say too, just really quick to get out of the way, is you and I were talking the other day, and we are like, um, I was saying like I was scouting an area, and I never find buck bedding. I shouldn't say never, but rarely do I find buck bedding right on the point. And this checklist that we sometimes hear in podcasts and on YouTube and stuff like that. For me, it really like works in the areas that I'm in. And you were like, yeah, like you just find the sign where the sign is at, and it's going to tell you. Like, it's
mm,
not a prescription. Like, you may listen to this today, and it may not like come out exactly like you explain it, but you got to find it where it's at in your area, and adapt it to what you're hunting.
100%. Yeah, like I just try not to be like a one trick pony, right? Like I
Yeah.
have things that I prefer to hunt in ways that I like to hunt, but I'm open minded and I think that makes opportunity. Like I'm not gonna walk through an area and there's great sign near thick cover, but it's not in a spot that I like and not hunt it. Yeah, I mean that deer is doing it because that's where he lives at and that's where he likes to be. So it doesn't make any sense to go over to a crossing, 500 yards away and be like, well, I like this spot better, so I'm gonna hunt here. Hunt where the freaking deer are, man. Manipulate him, that take advantage of the things that he's doing to kill him. You know what I mean? Like he's got no deer is unkillable. Now there are situations where it makes it very, very difficult if you got um, the deer jumping from private to public, that kind of thing. That makes it a difficult situation. But if you're in the slap dab middle of public and there's a deer living on it, you can kill him. Like he's doing something throughout the day that will get him killed, right? You just have to be careful about how you do things and put the puzzle together. He walks by a million trees, right? You've heard that before.
Yeah.
You just got to be in one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure, man. I love that. All right, sorry. So I'll stop interrupting. We'll get back to the scrape. So you're looking at height, you're looking at thickness of the licking branch, you're looking at where that scrape is located compared to bedding and cover. What else about those scrapes are you looking for? Or you talked about tracks, pulling back the leaves and looking at tracks.
Well, I think you asked me about the bedding. I'll
Yes.
hit that real quick.
Yep.
It's a very difficult, I think, thing to for the mountains because I think deer don't bed in the same bed often in the mountains. They have areas that they like to hunt. So I tried that game for like a year and a half, and I said nope. I said it might work for somebody else, but that's not my forte, right? So I find all these beds, and I can tell if it's doe bedding, if it's a buck bed, and I can see why he's doing it. But that buck ain't gonna lay there in a bed all year long. He has probably multiple beds in a couple 100 yard circle around the bed that you found that he likes to lay on. So the chances of you going in and setting up for him to come out very low odds it's going to be a one time thing. I mean, he comes out of his bed, comes down this trail. It's just great. It doesn't happen like that very often. So I just try to put together as many things as I can in relation to where the deer likes to bed. And then you just take advantage of like cold fronts or I like following the red moon a little bit, stuff like that. You just find as many things as you can to put together to up your odds. And then you try to take advantage of the setup.
Yeah, you're stacking things on top of each other, right? Like to
Mhm.
just increase your odds of having that encounter.
Right. Yep.
How often do you, I just might chase for a second, but how often do you hunt a particular buck? Do you target a buck, or are you more of a like an opportunist where like I'm going to put myself where I know multiple shooters that I want to kill are at?
I'm a lot of things.
Nice. I love that answer.
So,
I love it.
so yeah, it depends on the season. It depends on what I have bucks that I have on camera. Now, I will say like this has been going on a stretch though. This has been like the last 5 years probably ever since I killed, if I could point him out, that one right there. That was my target buck that year. I hunted him for 2.5 years before I killed him. Um, but I treated him the same way before I killed him, right? So I was hunting that deer that first year, and I had one encounter with him, and I'd never seen him again. Well, gun season came, and a really good 3.5-year-old come in, and I shot him. So that's a lot of times that's how I play my game. Like I'll pick out a big deer because usually I can find one or two slobs to hunt, but they're not always in good places to hunt. You know what I mean? I'll give them my best shot for as long as I can, but if we're playing cat and mouse and it just isn't close enough for me to think that he's killable at that time, and another big buck comes in and he's tempting, he's probably going to get it.
Yeah, I love it.
Yep. That's just like what happened last year, man. I was hunting a big one here last year, and it was like November 6th, and I hadn't seen anything out of him in over a month, and I was just completely out of the game. And a good 3-year-old buck come in, and I showed him.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. What I wrote down was don't pigeonhole yourself to like,
Pretty much, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Just be open to it all and take the
There's nothing
opportunities.
wrong with holding out. You know what I mean? If you want to hold out and keep your tag in your pocket and hunt that deer all year long, that's, good for you, man. Like props to you because I can't. I like to kill bucks.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I kind of pride myself on that. I kill a deer every single year in PA since I've been 12, and I want to keep it rolling.
Yeah. Oh man, that's an incredible stat. That is awesome, man. That is so cool. I got to learn to shut up here, man. You're saying things that's sparking ideas in my head, but trying to get back to the scrapes.
Now, they're not all. They weren't all 3-year-olds and big bucks. There was 12 to probably 18. There was a lot of baskets that hit the dirt.
it, it- but it should be that way, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
it's a progression. That's what killers do. Is they kill, just like Ryan Glitsky said.
Yep.
Killers kill. Yep, that's awesome. All right, try to get back to scrapes again. So, so you were talking about bedding. You're saying like, yeah, the bucks kind of bed, deer bed in multiple locations. So it's not that you're like zeroing on one particular bed with that, but you're looking for scrapes outside of bedding. What else there what else are you looking for in the scrapes?
Um, I mean, I think we kind of went over the main portion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think. It's early in the morning. I had coffee in my hand. I didn't bring my notebook. No,
Dude, I'm struggling, dude. I'm
but
struggling.
no, the size of the scrape can matter, like I said, but mainly I'm looking for the track size, the licking branch height, licking branch size, and then is it in relation to bedding? Like, is it in a spot close enough to cover where you could see a buck come into that in the daylight, right? And I think there's a million different setups to kill one on a scrape. Because a lot of it has to do with the deer's personality too, right? Like some bucks just don't move very much. They get up and they take their time, and you might have to try to kill that kind of deer on a scrape and literally on the edge of cover, which you might have another buck that he's just a walker. He likes to roam around. He might be up walking, 45 minutes before dark. He might be on a scrape that's 100 yards off the cover.
Mm-hmm.
So it's super, super location based because I even have scrapes that are like out in the middle of an oak flat that like certain time of year, you get a 3-year-old buck on it, 4-year-old buck on it in the daylight. You know what I mean? And those are the kind of situations I like to take advantage of too. With trail camera data, right? So everything for me is like data based. That if I can get a slew of, dates to put together, then I think that really ups your odds. You're spending more valuable time on certain spots. And I'll say a lot of times, like deer will shift from scrapes too. Like I have scrapes in big oak bottoms that are really, really hot in the summertime, but come October, that they feed off that because your vegetation starts to go away, right? As soon as the summer vegetation dies and that oak flat really opens up because your ferns are gone, your leaf cover's down, and the deer don't feel as comfortable coming through that area because in the summertime you have all your green growth coming out of your creek bottoms and the ferns and all that to feel a little bit better, I feel. And then there's no pressure either, right? And
Yep.
in September and early October, if there are guys in that area, that's when they start poking around, scouting just like you are, right? So the deer are cutting other guys' boot tracks, and they're just going to be more skeptical to be walking across an open oak flat in the daylight. So those are like kind of situations where I'll just say like if you have a great big community scrape in a bottom and you got velvet bucks just smashing it, I'd be running a camera on it because then you're going to get a good inventory and know what's in the area because that's probably the main scrape at that point of the year. So you're going to have probably 90% of the deer that are in that area on that scrape. But I would be looking for other scrapes on the outside of that one. Maybe even if you could get a direction of travel where those bucks are going and coming from, trying to get to that next thick piece of cover that you know that they're going to and coming from, and trying to find another scrape a lot closer to that cover. Like I said, look for the tracks, look for the licking branches, all that stuff. And then you might be more off to kill that deer on that kind of scrape rather than come out in the middle of that oak bottom.
Yeah, I love that. So, I think it's really important when guys go in and they find this sign, to think through that. What is this going to look like during the time that I'm hunting it? And I think even in that, there's stages. So if you're planning on hunting October, well, you're still going to have some cover. Like, there's still going to be some ground cover. It probably isn't going to be as thick as it was during the summer. You're still going to have, canopy. You're going to have leaves on the trees, all of those things. Now you shift. So if you're hunting in October, that's what you have. Now you get into November, and most of that's dead. You may still have, some oak trees holding, but depending on where you're at in the country, but the undergrowth is going to be gone. That has shocked me before, where I've come in and done pre-scouting out of state, thinking, okay, this is great. It's thick. I got scrape here. This is going to be awesome. And then I show up for the rut hunt, and it's a wide open, and I'm like, what happened? What happened in this area?
Mhm.
So you have to think through that. A good way, at least for me, when the way scouting now helps me see what it's going to look like in November. And November might have a little bit more cover, a little bit more than what we have right now, but it gives me a general idea of like, okay, this is what it looks like. So if it looks thick now, I know for sure it's going to look thick in October, November. But if it looks wide open, then I got to kind of consider that a little bit. So I love that you pointed that out. And so you're using like a scrape like that for intel, just inventory, trying to find out what's there. I love that because it gives me confidence. Like I won't I I shouldn't say that. Just like you, I don't want to hold myself to one thing. I will target a buck, and I have targeted a buck, but I like the confidence of just knowing what's there. It doesn't mean that I might not pick one of those bucks out, but man, I know this area's got some good ones. So I'm walking in when I'm hunting and I'm feeling good. And that's so important.
Yep.
So then you're talking about, okay, you found that. Let's move off of that and find the scrape that is more into that bedding that's going to hold up throughout the season. Let me ask you this. So I had Brian Dombrowski on. I think he was my first guest, and he looks at rubs and finds characteristics of a rub that he can associate to a particular buck. So every time he finds that rub, he's looking, going, "Yup, this is that buck." Can you do that with a scrape, with like the height of the scrape and maybe the print? I'm assuming you could pair up. But do you try to do that to go, okay, like, hey, I found this scrape here that's going to be a good summertime scrape. I like the buck that's on there. Is there a way to like find another scrape that looks comparative to that one? Does that hold up? Like, yeah, this is, or does it look different?
I don't know that I've ever done that specifically because I think as far as this is a scenario that I have in my head when I hear that question. It's if I was in an area and I had a good community scrape and the licking branch is really high, and I had a picture of a deer and it come together. The deer had a high set rack, but there wasn't any other deer in there that had a really high rack. and I found other scrapes with really high liquid branches, then I think you could put that puzzle together. But man, we just don't get a pile of like super crazy like characteristics in
Mhm.
our deer's racks. So I feel like that's kind of hard to do, at least where I'm at. Um, I'm
Yeah.
sure you could match up track size, but you would almost have to be in that situation where you had a picture of the deer, like shortly before you got there to check your camera or something like that. So you could be like, that was that deer's print,
Mm.
take a picture, and then you could try to match it up again, is how I would feel that would situation would have to roll out. I don't think that I've ever had that opportunity because I think there's so many deer hitting the scrape that I'm getting pictures of. It's kind of like, well, which one's his? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. So in Michigan where I hunt, I think you could do that because
Mm.
on some of the pieces that I hunt, you have one, two, maybe three good sized bucks of the same caliber, and the rest are going to be really young, year and a half old bucks, maybe two and a half. You're going to be dominant by the year and a half year old bucks where I hunt. So if you can get a certain height, you could probably narrow it down to, if you're running a good inventory scrape, you could probably narrow it down to say, okay, this one of these three bucks is hitting this one. But now if I go to
Mhm.
like, say somewhere out Midwest where mature bucks are, more prevalent, yeah, I would think there's probably no way to do that. But kind of going down a rabbit hole on that one, but I'm thinking Michigan in my head, and I got to get out of that because Michigan, you could actually use that tactic, I think.
Right.
Okay, so so you're running trail cameras on these scrapes.
Hmm.
Is there a technique for that? I mean, do you do that? So you're running for inventory, like in these thick ones. You're probably putting them up on ones that you may hunt later on. Are you freshening scrapes up, like kind of doing the Troy Pottinger thing, or?
Yeah. So, like I said, if I would go into a piece and there's 25 scripts, for example, I'd probably walk by like 22 of them because a lot of bucks, you get those young ones in there, they're just roaming around making scrapes just because they're all hyped up, frustrated, whatever. But the really good scrapes in an off season, if it's a new area, just for example, I'll pick those best scrapes out and I'll freshen them up. I play around. Honestly, it's a bad habit of mine. Like everybody has their like thing that like makes them feel like it's hunting season. And I grew up like me and dad used all kinds of scents, and I loved it. Like I do love deer scents, but I know it's a bad thing, right? If it's the wrong product, like I can't stand walking into Walmart and seeing like all the like $8 bottles of fake deer piss. I'm like, ah, God, because I see those bottles like laying around the woods, right? But I do have my best luck. I love using like the buck fever stuff. And lately, I've been messing around using some Black Widow, that branch butter. That I got some of that. It's really potent. I haven't got any inventory back on it, but the scrapes that I've been putting it on, I've been marking that on my Spartan Forage app. That way, I know what was on that branch, and then I can do a comparison to see what's what. But I do love messing around with scents. Um, as far as like in the dirt, I usually don't put anything. But I have in the past, and I use the raw scent, the frozen stuff. I've had really, really good luck with that stuff. When I this buck right here, I had him hitting the scrape, but I had put raw frozen scent in. It was just a multi buck urine. I had 25 different bucks in November come and shred that scrape.
Holy cow.
Now that's I'm not like plugging raw. Like it was because of raw. Like the scrape was just in a great spot, right? But I would sneak in there and I would just put like a little capful in and do the same. It seemed like every time I'd put a little capful in, a buck would come shred it. Well, then obviously the next buck that comes by smells the buck that was just there. Then he would shred it. And it was just like a giant like parade of 2 year olds. And then this buck here was hitting it too.
Are you doing
So
are you doing mock scrapes, or are you just going off of scrapes that are already pre-existing?
I prefer to do just regular scrapes that are already there and then fine tune them or make them better. But there's certain situations where I make mocks. Yeah, like I just made a couple mocks. I think I made two mocks like 2 weekends ago. Where I say like an example of a setup that I would like to put a mock is I was on the downwind side of some bedding but I got to a certain spot on the downwind side. The bank laid out the way that it needed to, and there was at least 4 or 5 different trails that met in one spot. Like I think there was two paralleling trails, and then there was at least 3 trails coming in and out of the cut, and they all met in one spot. So basically, I don't expect that scrape to get like all year round attention, but I need it there to just get a buck to stop. Like I had my tree picked out, and then I'm like, okay, if I put the scrape right here, one's in my face, all these trails congregate right here. If a buck comes to parallel this downwind side, that scrape would get him to stop for just a second to give me a shot, right?
Yeah.
So I don't need like I'll probably go back and put a camera on that, but I'll just let it soak. But
Yep.
that's one of those spots where I'm not going to be going in and even checking it really. Like I'm going to go in like late summer, put a camera, freshen it up, just spray the heck out of it with licking branch, and uh, and then that's just a spot that I'm going to like probably a November sit where the downwind side of bedding, and then that is there. It's established. It's been established since it's March now, and it's just something to get the deer to stop because it's so thick in there. A lot of these areas are full of buck laurel, and you only have little windows to shoot through. So this is just a spot where this gives me the opportunity where he's going to stop and give me a 3 second opportunity to shoot.
So when you're prepping like a mock scrape or you're freshening up a new scrape, are you like wearing the gloves and making sure that you don't step anywhere or touch a branch with your skin? Um, or because reason why I'm asking because every time I try to do that, I mess up. Like my glove breaks, I'm hitting the branch, like it just doesn't work out for me. But I'm just curious, what
Mm-hmm.
kind of preparation do you take?
So I used to just use my bare hands, and then I went from that to I was using just like my little clippers, and I wouldn't clip the branches. I would just use them to break the branches.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I felt like maybe there was something I could have done better. So I did talk to Troy Pottinger a little bit about it. And I'll only say this because I heard him say it on social media now. So I'm not like giving away one of the secrets or something. But um, just like rubber work gloves is
Hmm.
what I take with me now. And I've been doing that this year, using those to like really shred the branches up and twist the branches and break them up and make it look real.
Yeah, you're not doing that with pre-existing though. You don't have you're not like refreshing up a licking branch or anything like that with your hands, or are you?
With rubber gloves on, I will. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Um yeah, I was using really thin ones and they were just breaking on me all the time and I'm like I'm
Yeah,
just
like like latex.
yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm like I'm just making this worse. Like um all right, cool. So now you found the scrapes. You're freshening them up sometimes. Do you freshen up every scrape that you want to hang a camera on?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And then you're putting your camera up. Are you hanging high with your camera, focusing down on the scrape, or are you more of a hip level guy?
Now, so I prefer, especially on a scrape, I want it to be 6, 7 foot at least, and then angle it down. And I like to have a good visual of or an idea of where the deer is going to come from to the scrape. So obviously, you don't want the camera like facing
Yeah.
right where he's coming from because if he looks right at it, I feel like I've heard this before and I took notice to it, and it's true in my opinion. If that buck comes into that scrape for the first time and he looks right at your camera, you might as well forget it. He's he might not stop coming through that area, but he's going to be going all around. He's going to start checking that script from downwind if he wants to check it, and he's going to skirt your camera, 100%. Like I think once they see it, it's a done deal.
Yeah, I had a buck come in last year on that piece here by home that I was scouting, and it came into the scrape. It was a mock scrape that I made, and he came into it and looked right up at my camera. My camera was actually on that one was probably 8 feet up in the tree, but the tree was so small that I think it just I wrapped it around too many times and he saw the lock on it and I mean he looked right up at it and it was a beautiful buck and I thought oh crap and sure enough never saw him again. You know,
Yep,
I
yep.
was like,
Yeah, I like to hang mine off to the side. So like if you have the scrape and a licking branch here, I want it off to the side. Look, you
mhm.
get that side view of it. That way nothing's coming right in at your camera.
Yeah, that was the other mistake I made. I hung it to where the way they were coming at it, like they were either going to be getting like the back view of him, or he was going to be facing right into my camera. And that was it
Mhm.
too. As soon as I saw him, I mean, he was looking straight up at it. I'm like, oh, I'll never. And sure enough, never saw him again.
Yep.
Yep. So are you running a combination of cell and SD, just cell, just SD? Like kind of, do you have a rhyme and reason for what type of camera you're going to put up on that scrape?
Yeah, I got both. I'm mainly an SD guy. I think I have 5 cells now, and I try to use them sparingly.
Hmm.
So I'll either run all SDs, and then in the fall I take cells with me. If I check a card and there's a huge buck on it that I want to monitor, then I'll throw the cell up. Or if I go out of state or something, I'll try to keep one with me. But yeah, I'm mostly an SD guy. I think I probably have oh probably 55 SDs and 5 cells. It's starting
Yeah.
to be like a part-time job now.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I can imagine. I'm running about 30 altogether. Maybe I'm probably getting closer to 40 now. Yeah, and if I'm not just soaking them, it's a lot of work, man. It's a lot of work. How if you're not soaking them, um, and when I say soaking, what I mean is I will put them into areas that I'm not going to hunt that year and just let them run. I might check them once just to make sure that they're getting what I want them to get, and then I'm done and just letting it soak, and I'll grab them at the end of the year and just see what the spot look like. So, how often are you checking those cameras on these scrapes?
So I think it's really situational.
Yeah.
Like if it's like you said, if it's a new area that I know I'm not going to hunt, I'll just leave it sit like all year basically, and just hope for the best. I'll put on low settings. Um, but if it's an area that I'm really intrigued with, or I have a target buck, then I try to get in there. I don't know. Like last year, I put some cameras up in like June and July, and then I didn't go back to check them until like late August or like early September. So I try not to be intrusive, but it is kind of hard sometimes running SDs. You, you have to
Yeah.
be present to get the
Yeah.
information, right?
Yeah.
Um, but that's part of hunting. I think it's good to be present as far as like cell cams are good and they have their place too, but I feel like some people I think rely on too heavy.
Yeah.
Um, because dude, you could be getting a picture of a buck on the cell, and you're still missing details because you didn't go get to check an SD card and see something that you didn't know was there.
Yeah, I agree. I run cell out of state and it tells me a lot. So like if I start to see pressure coming into that piece, then like a significant amount of pressure, then I've got to maybe recalculate my game plan. And then also just knowing it'll build up confidence for me. Like I'll have them on these, I'll run them on scrapes and then take an inventory throughout the year and even leading up to my trip, because a lot of my out of state trips are rut. So I'm getting data through October. And if it's good, I'm feeling great when I'm coming into my, but I'm not actually
Right,
using,
right.
I'm not using that camera to hunt that spot, like a lot of my stuff's just set up so I can kind of monitor what's going on in the area and my pre-scouting and then my in-season scouting, once I get there, is going to dictate how I hunt. Um,
Absolutely. Like I said, they have their place.
mhm,
Out of state makes the most sense to me, and the security stuff, things like
mhm.
that. But I mean, there are some people that they hunt over their cell cameras. I mean
Yeah,
that's their livelihood.
yeah, yeah. I don't think I ever want to get to that point, where I'm doing that, but each their own. Um, so I want to be conscious of your time. I got so many more questions to ask about different stuff, but it's 20, it's 20 to 9 right now. How are you doing on time?
I'm good.
Cool. We'll keep rolling. So you're hanging camera, you're getting data. Um, we've identified the scrapes, we've worked them up. How often are you going into refreshing your scrapes? Is there a rhyme or reason, or just as you're checking, you go in, freshen it up too, or it?
Yeah, I don't think that I would go back in to specifically
Yep.
refreshing a scrape, because once it's established, right?
Yeah.
Um, Now, I will say there's certain situations like I've heard guys say I haven't done this personally, but I hear guys say every time I go and check this camera and I fresh up this ligament branch, then that buck just comes back and just shreds it. Which you're adding another deer to the scrape, right? So that buck's like, what the hell?
Yeah.
There's a deer coming in here and I don't know who he is, and then he tries to open market. So there are those situations, but I don't purposely go in and do that. The cameras on the scrapes for me are mainly for data purposes. But I mean, if I walk in and check a card and there's a buck hitting it 4 out of 7 days, like I'm sitting it, right?
Yeah.
But mainly my goal at the end of the year is to have those dates that I can log and write down in a book and just have, like this spot is good from these days to these days, and a spot 500 yards from it really fired up like 2 days after that for like a 3 day period, that kind of thing. They're just putting the puzzle pieces together, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So are you working a plan off of that scrape, or do you plan on hunting the scrape, or
If I can
both?
hunt this, right? If I can hunt the scrape and it's in a good enough spot, I'll hunt it. I love scrape hunting, but
Yeah.
um, I think we talked yesterday a little bit, and I had said about scouting bottoms. I think the terrain surrounding the scrapes are just as important, right? So if if you have a big scrape in the bottom or a low section, or that's just an example. It could be anywhere. But if you have a buck hitting it all the time, but it's at nighttime, then I'm looking at terrain features that are adjacent to that scrape. Like what terrain feature is close that he would feel secure or safe walking in the daylight? And then is there a pinch there? You're looking for something to really like to narrow that down. And it cannot manipulate that spot with a certain wind or a thermal, right? So you're just looking for something off to the side where maybe he can catch the thermal or the scent off that scrape. And then you're finding that terrain feature that pinches him down so you can find the spot where you can kill him or he's going to walk through.
Yeah. So, man, I just was running a scenario through my head, thinking of a high pressured hunting situation. Um, so you have this scrape off of bedding. And bedding, when I say bedding, I'm talking about a bedding complex. Like it could be, I don't know, 5 acres. It could be, a couple 100 yards of just thick bedding. Um, I'm thinking that, so do bucks hit those first? I don't want to make it sound like bucks just are robots, but is that a technique that a buck will hit that first before heading out to food during the season? I'm talking not during the rut here, but like, and I'm not talking about scrape week, but that time during the season when they're just kind of from bed to feed. Do you find those bucks hitting that scrape first on their way out to food, or is there no, it doesn't work out that neat?
All right. So like I said, there's like 1,000 different situations,
Yeah.
but that's where the location comes in, right?
Yeah.
So I think if that scrape is in between where he likes to lay up for the day and where he wants to feed at that time of the year, you can pretty much expect him to walk close to or check that scrape as he's headed to his designated feed area, right? So, and then being able to kill him on that revolves around as if it's close enough to where he's betting at, because I'm assuming you're talking about earlier part of the season
I
here,
am. Yeah.
if we're not the scrape season yet. So in my eyes, that time of the year, I'm just going to say the first and second week of October, that buck isn't moving very fast anywhere. That he's getting up, he might be up on his feet an hour before dark, but man, he's taking his time, and how slow they move. You're
Hmm.
Mister I kill 200s.
Whatever. No,
Slow, right?
they do.
So that's where I was talking about putting together like a weather front, or like matching it up with the moon, or maybe you run onto a wind that he really likes to move on, and then you just got to get as close to where you think he's laying up to, or if he's for some reason the scrape is close enough to where he's bedding at, then you can position maybe between the scrape and where he's bedding just to try to close that gap a little bit. Maybe you'll catch him that last 5-10 minutes before legal ends.
Yeah, you nailed what I was getting at. So I'm thinking high
Mhm.
pressure state. I just know when trying to get it done in Michigan, um, rarely do I see a buck, an hour before, you know, dark, kind of strolling on his way to food. And I'm thinking, the scrape would, if I can find it close enough to the bedding complex, could be it's not hunting the bed, but it might be a point for him to draw out just maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes before dark. It might give me a chance in that early season. Um, so you kind of confirmed what I was saying. So now that you've kind of got your scrapes established, is there, and you started talking about topography and stuff like that. You're not only scrape hunting. I mean, you're not just a scrape hunter. So what are some of the other signs um, that people might be missing as they're walking through the woods and putting this game plan together? Because I do want people to have like a multifaceted approach and not just go like, I am just scrapes, or I'm just bed. I think, like you said, there are some people who are black belt level that can do that. But for most of us, we need to have as many options, that available to us. So what else are people kind of like walking through that you think, what? I bet you not a lot of people are paying attention to this.
I think rubs are a big one.
Yeah.
And, rubs is the same as scrapes in relation to bedding. Like one scenario that popped right into my head is if you're on the downwind side of just cover, right? And let's say you're scouting at this time of year. So if you're side hilling cover and you have rubs running out the side of the hill, I wouldn't automatically assume that you could hunt that rub line in October, right? Like as soon as you see that rub line that's running parallel, I'm automatically thinking like that's a buck in November coming down this. He's
Mm.
letting that aggression, whatever, as he's moving along, trying to cut no trails. Now, if you start seeing side hill trails and then you get rubs that are cutting up into the cut, now that's more October time-ish frame in my head because you can see that buck's coming out of that cut at that point, right? And then as far as like what I'm looking for on a rub, obviously, is I'm looking for the tine marks up high above the actual like large portion of the rub. And like I said, there's not a lot of character that I run into here in PA, so I'm sure this is different than in other states. But mainly, I'm just looking. They don't have to be giant trees. I don't find a lot of giant rubs here. I don't find them waist high very often. I guess very, very few times I find giant waist high rubs here. They're usually just they're a little bit bigger than a pop can, and they're shredded up pretty good. Maybe nothing crazy. And then I'm just looking for those time marks, and it doesn't even have to be into the bark, right? So I'll like stare at these things. If I can see just like I'll use like a young maple tree as an example. If the center is, let's say it's fresh. If the center is green and then right where the large portion of the rub stops and my like pinky to thumb spread, like if you spread out your pinky thumb as far as you can, it's about 9 inches. And I usually, that is like a reference. Like if the top of the rub and there's time marks above it. And if it's over like my 9 inch span of my hand, I'm like, all right, well, this deer's got some tines, right? And it doesn't mean it's a monster, but that tells me like there's a good buck here, right? And then you can start figuring out what he is. And like the time marks don't even have to be in the tree, like green busted up. Like you can see where his tines are moving and rubbing the bark.
Oh,
And then
that's good.
a lot of the a lot of other times is I'm looking behind if it's a group of young trees, if it's not one single tree, it's rubbed, and you're looking behind it and you're looking for marks on other trees.
Yeah. So were you saying like this? This is how you kind of measure the distance? Because
Just
that
with
would,
one hand. Yep, just
yeah.
like this.
Well, dude, that's like 4 inches for me. All right. Because I was thinking 9 inches. I'm like, I got to do this to get 9 inches probably. I'm a little guy. So, but, oh, that, I've never thought about that. That's a good way to determine kind of time length a little bit. Like you can get close enough to it. That is such a good tip. I'm going to get really basic on the rubs thing here because I remember like coming up and I had been hunting for like maybe 5 years and still didn't understand direction of travel with rubs. When you see a rub, do you Do you look at it as a direction of travel? So if you got the rub on, if we're looking at the tree and not the back end of my hand, but the side that's facing my face, that's the direction the buck is going, or do you view it a different way?
So that's oh God, it's so situational. Like I know I say that a lot, but like I I think we talked about this the other day where I told you that I listen to these podcasts and I hear all these like
That's why I'm
one
asking
way,
the question. Yeah.
there's all these one way things to do things. And I've just scouted and seen so many different scenarios that you rarely see the same thing twice. And I think I use that as like a good guideline, like a good reference. Like this deer's probably moving this direction, and that gives you a good indication if it's morning or evening, right? But I've seen bucks walk out of a cut and turn around and rub a tree
Yeah.
the opposite direction they come from. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's like it's a rule of thumb,
Yes.
and if you've hunted your area enough, especially in the hill country, you could pretty much figure the direction that they're heading. Obviously, they're in the bottoms in the mornings and coming back up, and you're coming back up in the morning and betting on top. But I've also seen that opposite. Don't want that for you because I've seen it opposite. I killed my buck in Maryland, not this past season, the season before, doing the opposite. That sucker was coming up the mountain in the evening and feeding on the top. So
Yeah. Yeah. I seen a buck last year rub the side. Like, so he's standing next to it and he's rubbing it this way,
mhm.
you know? And so it's nowhere near the direction of travel that he's doing. And yeah, that was interesting too. Yeah, really cool. No, I asked the question because I knew the answer that I think that you were going to give was like it's it's not a one size fits all program.
Yep.
Yep. Awesome. Really good. Um, okay, so on those rubs, are you are you setting up like especially the horizontal rubs downwind of bedding? Um, I mean, that's something I would imagine I would probably hunt. I would look at that and I would go, okay, during the rut, this might be it. Like if everything sets up, if there's more than just the rub line. Let's say I got that rub line and I've got a scrape and I've got good bedding and it's thick. That might tell me that hey, I'm going to set up in this area for the rut. Are you using rubs to actually like formulate a game plan for a sit? Like, are you going to sit on a rub line?
I don't think that I would specifically set up on rubs unless it was like I'll do that in Maryland in like September, like a September setting when obviously the rubs are just starting to pop up. And if they're shredded up and broken and they're headed to a bedding area in between feed, like obviously that's where the deer's traveling through. So that's a setup that I would sit on if I was like hunting for green, fresh rubs in September. Now, I mean, because October comes and I feel like every buck that travels everywhere,
Yeah.
if a cold front comes in, every 2 year old's trashing everything they get their head on, right? Um, so I think they're just good indicators. I use those to tell me if it's a good deer or not. And then I look for those details that I talked about, like time length and things like that. It might not tell me if the deer is a giant, right? Now there's indications like if you have a tree that's just the size of my coffee cup and it's just absolutely shredded, like obviously a 2 year old didn't do that. But a lot of times I just don't see giant shredded trees here. And I think that's just like the difference between like Pennsylvania and then like out west. I think the deer out west are just more aggressive because this might be a little more high level, but I've talked to other guys and we talked about this a little bit, specifically about like really, really big deer not making giant rubs.
Oh yeah.
And it's because they like to live almost in silence, right? Like
Mhm.
they're antisocial, just creatures, sometimes you just don't even know they're there and they make very subtle signs because they don't want to give away their position. So that's where it gets a little more specific, but for the main part, I'm looking for maybe where the rubs are going and coming from, and I'm looking for those details, and then I'm trying to find the scrape if I haven't found the scrape already. Like the scrape for me is like, okay, I got good rubs. It looks like this deer's got good tines coming this direction. I hit the scrape, and if there's a freaking 4 finger, 5 finger track in it, and the licking branch is 7 feet tall, I'm like, absolutely, puzzle's
Yeah.
starting to come together. And then I'm looking at, where is it compared to bedding? What direction he's going to be coming from? what window I think that he's going to come to this on. I'm going to freshen up a little bit and I'm going to put a camera on it off the side where he's not going to see it. And then I just heard this the other day too, and I'm actually guilty of this. I heard, I want to name drop a bunch of stuff here, but I heard Johnny Stewart and
Yeah.
Rendell Harry talking about this the other day on Bo's podcast,
Yeah,
and
it's
it
a great
makes a lot of
podcast.
sense. Yeah, and have been guilty of this in the past where you walk into an area and you find fresh sign, and the first thing you want to do is hang a camera on it rather than hunt it, right? I
Yeah.
think everybody's super guilty of that, and that is like a high level tip from him. Um, now I've done it. I've done it both ways, but I am back to want to put a camera up. But that's a solid one right there. You know, you don't always have to, especially if it's in season, right? If you're walking and just maybe have you stand on your back, bow in your hand, and you're walking around. If you see fresh sign, dude, don't be like, well, it looks okay, but I think I want to put a camera on it first. Like, no, dude, if it looks good, hunt the damn thing because you might have an opportunity that night, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was a big transition for me is to when I started doing that. Like I'll have a spot that I'm planning on going to, but I'm scouting my way in the whole time. And if I come across something that's fresher, or fresh and looks great, like I in the last couple of years I have transitioned to be like, okay, I'm bailing on that and I'm moving here. I mean, if it calls to me, my spidey sense goes off. I'm like, I'm comfortable bailing on my original plan and setting up. And I've watched my not to say that they're all like huge quality bucks, but my buck sightings and opportunities like skyrocket doing that. Um, the rut thing for me during I got to remember like a lot of times my thought process is stuck in the rut because I'm traveling during that time. And so for me, when I walk into a piece, even if I've scouted it, you know, I probably don't know the piece all that well. Like when I'm coming in and scouting out of state, like it's giving me the information that I feel comfortable that the caliber of buck I'm looking for exists on that piece of property. And I'll run cameras which will verify that for me, but I still haven't figured out all the pieces. And I'm going in and I'm setting up the pieces as I walk through. So if I walk in and I see a bunch of rubs. And even if 2-year-olds laid those rubs down and it's outside of bedding, it just verifies that like, okay, there's action going on here. And it's going to become a starting point for me. If all the other pieces are there, the scrapes there, I've got the rubs and the bedding, then, I may sit at it a little bit longer than I would on that first scenario. But that's what I'm looking for. I'm just looking for markers of rut action. And I start there and then move based off of like how much action I'm actually seeing. That's so just to clarify my statement. And I've got to get my head,
So
I got to get my head out of rut all the time.
I can't say that I'm like that much different because like I'm not walking in March and like, okay, where's all the early season setups, right?
Yeah.
Like you learn, and I can't stress that enough. Like these podcasts are great, right? For like tips and information, but you don't learn anything high level until you've done it physically, right? Um, so like I'll go into an area and the first thing I'm looking for is scrapes. Like I want to find the scrapes, and then once you start finding scrapes, I mean, your scrapes are probably where a lot of the other signs are going to come together too as well. And then
Mhm.
you just start branching off of that and your rubs and your bedding areas. And as I'm going through all of that, I find different setups for different times of the year. I'll find a scrape and I'm like, well, it's kind of open here. It's not in a great location to kill on. I said, but I'll work off of here. And
Mhm.
as I work off of there, you get into some thick cover or some buck laurel and you find a junction of trails that come together and you find a tree that works for a wind that gets you close and you're like, man, that's a setup right there. And then I'll pin it. Right. And then maybe I'll go back to the scrape and go the opposite direction, go that way. Maybe there's an oak flat with bedding cover above it and there's a rub line coming straight down the hill. I'm like, man, that could work for early season. Like that deer could be coming out of that bedding, coming down and hitting this oak flat. And dude, I'll mark it. I'm like, man, there's like 2, 3 big whites in here. There's a couple big reds. Like I need to mark these so I can come back and see if they're producing acorns later this year.
Mhm.
And then I want to have a camera on the big scrape that's out in the open because that's going to be your inventory. You're going to get pictures there in the daytime through the summer, and then you're going to get all your nighttime activity probably in the fall. And there's big open scrapes, but it's still inventory, right? You know the deer are there, and then knowing the deer are there is when you start moving off to the sides. So I feel better about if I'm checking a scrape in a bottom, an open bottom, where even if it's a spot where other people do come through at, maybe that buck lays in a position where he knows when you're there, but it doesn't bother him because he watches other people do it too. So if I could position my camera on a scrape where I could come in and check it, I'm like, well, I know the deer knows I'm here, but he knows not to go to that scrape in the daylight. But the next time you come in, and now that you know he's there, you can throw him off by coming in the back door, hunting off to the side where you haven't stepped foot in yet since the early season when you mark the tree in March. Then it's like he comes in like, whatever these guys, I got these guys figured out. And bam, you catch him off guard and you kill him.
Yeah.
It's just all those little things that come together. You know what I mean?
What I love about our podcast today that hasn't been a prescription. It's not like step one, step two, step three. That's a little bit of my ADHD going on, but it's good because I feel like that's where I went wrong for so many years because when I went into an area, I couldn't make step one, two, and three line up. Like it just didn't work for me. So then I would get frustrated and felt like my confidence would drop, go, oh man, I heard so and so, this is how he does it, and I can't find this anywhere. So, but I can start finding these different pieces and then putting that puzzle to that property together. And that changed a lot for me. So that's what I want to encourage people to do is actually just listen to this, not as a prescription, but as more of a description of things that you should be looking for. And then it's up to you to figure out how those puzzle pieces fit in that location with those deer because it's different across everywhere you go.
No, 100%. I mean, there's 10, 15 different setups that I find in hunt. And there's certain scenarios that only work for one area. And, they're all within 10 minutes of my house or something, just for example. But like this setup might work here, but it's not going to work on the piece that's the opposite 10 minutes over here. I've told a story before. This buck here, I killed him uh, with the first week of season. And it's a spot that I have to hunt the first week of season because of the vegetation that's on the ground there. As soon as that vegetation dies, or we get that first cold front in October, like early October, as soon as that vegetation is gone, those deer shift and they leave because it's too open for them. So I know that first week I have to get in there and hunt if there's a good deer in that area. And that's how I got that deer.
Yeah, so you're processing a lot of data, and I kind of want to shift a little bit to that. So, I've heard a couple things. One, I've heard you kill the buck every year since you're 12. So you're, and I've also heard you talk about collecting like data, even for like the next season, or it took you 3 seasons to get to a particular buck. So you're definitely using the data for in the moment too. So you can have opportunity to kill bucks because you like killing bucks, but you're also using that data for next year, maybe even 2 years down the road. That piece right there was the hardest for me to overcome. Like I felt like I would ignore historical data or not collect historical data because I had so much pressure on myself that I had to kill this year and this year only. And then what I found out was, well, let's just say I did kill. Well, then I was no better off next year. I had to start the whole thing over again. And now that pressure still exists. So I started to pile up the historical data, or I'll call it historical, looking at historical sign, but also taking sign from the year before and applying it to the next year's. Um, how like what are you doing with that data? Are you I guess what's your process with it? At the end of the year, are you pulling cameras? Are you making a spreadsheet? Or are you just keeping it up here? Are you taking notes? Like what's your process for using data for the following years?
So I wish I had a bigger process with this. I think I take in the only information I take in is what is most important to me personally, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm the same way. I don't want to get like overrun with so much stuff that it like juggles my head because I get that way sometimes. And that's where I start to overthink things. Sometimes I make things way harder for myself than I actually need to. Even scouting in the woods, I overthink setups all the time. But then you get to step back and like, man, I gotta like, what's the simplest way? What's the most common sense way to sit here? That kind of thing, right? So like I just pulled some cameras in the last couple of weeks and I'd sit down on my laptop, I'm looking through it and I'll look through the pictures more than once. So I might skim through all the pictures and I'm like, oh man, that's a good buck. And I skip through and oh, there's another good buck. Well, I'll go through all the pictures, right? And then I'll go back at the
Mm.
beginning again and I'll put down like a notepad or have my phone in my hand and I'm like, okay, like that's a good buck. If he made it and he uses this area this time of year next year, that's a good time to be there. So I'll mark like what date the picture was, and then if it was AM or PM,
Mm.
and I'll go to the next big buck picture. I'm like, all right, this deer was here on this date on AM or PM, and I do that till I get to the end, right? Well, then I look at them. I'm like, so from October 24th through the 27th, there's a 4 day window there or whatever that there was like three different big bucks that showed up. So obviously that scrape either just heats up at that point or there's a doe that might be coming in early in that area and all these bucks are showing up to like check on her. So that's the kind of information that I want to find that, that scrape. I know now that I need to keep a camera on every year. And now I know what time frame I need to be in there. And now I know if it's AM or PM. And if they're all consistent with PM, well, now I know that I need to set up for dropping thermals. And now I have the direction the deer's coming into the scrape from. I know one direction that they like because I'll go back on, I forget what the website's called. I go back on like a weather app and at that, it's close to the time that that buck came into. If there's consistency, I'll mark down what the app says the wind was. So now I know what wind direction the deer likes to come into the scrape from. And then now I know like what side of the scrape that I need to be looking at to set up on, knowing where the wind's going to be coming, thermals are dropping, and what direction he's coming to it
Mm.
from.
I love it. I love how you started that off. You said you collect data that works for you. And I want to really stress that for everybody is that I think man, how do I say this? Because I think stretching yourself, if you're not a black belt level, stretching yourself to start to collect black belt level data will help you progress. But if you're a white belt and you jump right to black belt data, it can be overwhelming. It might even freeze you up. So start to figure out what works for you. And we were talking about offline, off before we started recording, like you were talking about something about the moon, as you mentioned earlier in this recording, and I was like, yeah, I can't even do that. Like, I have to keep things so simple in my mind. If I put too many data points in my head at the time, I freeze up and I don't get it done. So I love that you said that. And then what I also love what you said was this idea of going back and then going back through the photos. I find myself burning through the photos and having a general idea of like, okay, here's the dates, but unless I go back and break it down like that, it really isn't all that useful for me. So a lot of times I'm collecting, if I don't slow down like you did there, it's almost clogging my brain up because now I've just got a general idea of a bunch of bucks and it's stuck in my head. So now I'm going the other way. Okay, I need to break that down so it frees up spots in my brain so I know a little bit more exactly what is going on in that situation. I love that you pull up the weather app. That is, I think, a technique that will really help people. I started doing that about 5 years ago as well, and it just for me it gives me more confidence knowing okay, I'm sitting on the right wind at the right time, at the right time of year, and I know these bucks are in there at that time. Even if it doesn't pan out for me, at least while I'm sitting there, I feel good, and I think it's important. Like making yourself feel good as much as you can while you're sitting in the tree makes those days that you actually don't close the deal or maybe it doesn't come together not as painful, And I think confidence is key. And the more that you can break down data, and the more, and why not do it anyways, right? It's the off season. Why not sit there and work on this stuff right now? It'll help you the following year, and you'll walk into the following year with a lot more confidence. And even if that data didn't kill, the confidence is going to help you kill.
Mhm.
And that's what I was missing when I didn't do that. I was just focused on the here and the now. And the following year, it meant that I didn't have the confidence going into that season and it messed me up. So I just really want to encourage people, no matter what belt level you're at, start to collect that data and break it down, especially in the off season. It'll do wonders for you coming up the next year.
Mhm. Right. And like another important piece to that too, if you use the weather app as well, then you already know this.
Mhm.
You know, I might get on there and at that exact time that that buck coming in the scrape, it'll say it was blowing west. So just to confirm that, I would go back when the wind is blowing west on a regular day. There's no storm front coming in. So there you don't get no like mixed easterly or southerly signals. And if there's just a plain west wind forecasted for the day, I would go to that spot and see what it actually is doing.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
you could get fooled. Because
Yeah.
I find myself in that situation before, especially here in the mountains. If you have any kind of terrain, ridges, ditches, bowls, anything like that, that's going to cause a swirl, like you could get a lot of mixed signals. So there could be another reason why that deer is coming into that scrape. And a big thing with these scrapes, if it's in a certain terrain feature, sometimes they literally aren't huntable. Like you just can't hunt them because they're in that spot that they picked is specific because if it's in junction with like a bowl or a certain type of terrain feature, that you get so much swirling winds and thermals there that it's there because they can smell everything. Like
Hmm.
everything comes to that scrape. And that's why all the deer congregate there. So those are really hard sets to set up on. So those are the ones like specifically, like I said, I love hunting scrapes. Like I do. Like, if I have the opportunity to sit the scrape, I will. But sometimes you just can't. And sometimes you have to be off to the side somewhere where the wind just works. You know what I mean? To figure out where the deer is coming off the scrape, like after he's done hitting it
Hmm.
or coming to it, that's where you end up killing that.
Yeah, yeah. So funny when you brought up the wind and going back and looking at the historical wind data. The first thing I popped in my head, and I didn't say it, was it doesn't mean that's the wind in that location. In fact, rarely in any situation do I get like, oh, it's a west wind today, and I get to my spot and it's a true west wind.
Hmm.
The topography, the canopy, the all of it's going to change how that wind is moving in there. But what's important that though is that if it's a west wind and you go back to similar conditions, so for me that would mean it, let's just say I'm thinking of that scenario where I we were talking about where I had all these bucks come through on a certain day last year in an area that I didn't get to hunt. That was later on in the season, so not a big canopy. So I might want to go back now and wind map it to make sure that the wind, that means the wind will probably move similar. If I go back in the summertime when I've got foliage everywhere and I've got a canopy, that might not line up the same. The wind might be moving through there a little differently. So it's important to try to recreate the same conditions while you're testing out that wind. And I can guarantee you in that spot because I can picture it in my mind. It's right on the side of a huge ridge, and
Hmm.
so I'm almost sure that if whatever wind was going through there, at least forecasted, didn't actually fly through that area the way that the weather app is telling me it did. So I do need to go back there and do that. Yeah.
And also, I think one thing that guys don't take in consideration with wind direction when they're forecasting their own setups, like I want to say here for this west wind, they don't take in consideration temperature.
Yeah.
Like temperature dictates if you're going to get a southerly or a northerly, right?
Yep.
So if you're going to hunt a spot in early October, you might want to be like, well, it could be southwest, right? Or if I have a rain coming in, it could be kind of southeast because your front's coming in, cause those easterly pushes. And then if you're looking at spots where you want to hunt in late October or November when you're expecting, what's the biggest thing people want to hunt? Cold fronts.
Go from.
What brings cold fronts? Northerly winds. So you might want to set up your tree to be kind of like northwest off of that trail rather than just west because it's situational, but you don't want to be in a spot where like, I've got the perfect tree. It's on the downwind side. It's going to be a west wind.
Yeah.
Well, then you get a little bit northerly and then the north is pushing towards the direction the deer's coming from. But your scent doesn't just blow in a wee little tiny line, I mean, it goes out like a fan. So
Yeah.
now you might catch the edge of your wind before he even makes it to you.
So
I think that's a big thing to consider.
I've gotten messed up so many times going on a rutcation and finding bedding and thinking, okay, I'm going to set up downwind of bedding. And for me, thinking downwind's going to be north. How many times have we been hunting 80 degrees in the last few years or 60 degrees or 50 degrees? rising temps on November 4th, 5th, 6th. I mean, it happens a lot. The uh, Spartan Forge app, you can go in there and pull up the historical wind data for the month. And what's surprisingly is if you look in the month of November, in the Midwest, um, it's about 40-45% southerly winds during that time. And so you have to like take that into consideration. Don't just think that you're always going to be sitting on a north wind because of a cold front or because it's going to be cold during that time. No, that's why it's called a cold front. It's moving through
Mm-hmm.
and changing. And you should have a game plan for both, because if it's 40% southerly winds in November or the early part of November, chances are while you're down there, you're going to be fighting higher temps, and you're going to need to change your setup. So, yeah, I agree with you 100%. You really have to go in and think about all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially when planning out of state trips. It's so important.
Mhm. And I think it's important too, especially like out of state for just example, like when I head out west to scout, like I'm probably going to pick an east wind tree just
Yeah.
just in case. It might not be, this spot here I might have like 90% confidence. Like, man, this is like almost perfect, but it gets me by and it's where I need to be at. But if I got an east wind, that this spot doesn't mean nothing to me, right? So I'll have an east wind tree picked out, even though it's not perfect and like the pinch I want to be, but it's in the area that I need to be. And an east wind might throw that deer off, right? So then he comes into his bedding different, whatever. It'll all set up completely, situational. But I think it's just always good to have an east wind tree picked
Oh,
out just
for
on the back
sure.
burner.
Yeah, I think so too. It's so funny as you talk about historical data and the shift even that I made started to do that. We were talking about a camera that I've had set up for 2 years and the batteries haven't run out yet. So
Mhm.
that piece I can only hunt on an east wind. And so I started to analyze the data, and every time was seeing the big bucks, it was on an east wind. So last year I really didn't have much time to hunt. I'm at home and I found myself with a day, and I'm like, cool. I look up, it's an east wind. I hadn't scouted that area. I just ran enough historical data in that spot to know when there's an east wind, something good's going to happen. And I ran in
Mhm.
there and I blew it from Michigan. I blew it on a 130-inch public land buck. He was 20 yards behind me, and I was sitting on a waterfall. So I could just hear the waterfall. I couldn't hear the leaves. And I got
Mhm.
lazy and I spun around too quick. And he was sitting 20 yards looking right up at me. And I blew it there. But all day long in that spot, I had bucks coming in and out. And so I didn't get it done, but I was in the game, and if I was smarter, I would have got it done. So, and that was
Mhm.
all off of historical data of just what I know about that spot, what I know about that wind, and gave me the confidence to drive an hour and a half from my house, get up in there, and I had bucks all day long. So it's really valuable. I don't want people who are, looking to up their game to dismiss that and think, no, I just need to focus now. Do both and focus now and
Yeah.
collect that data. Yeah. And pay
And
attention
then,
to the wind.
yep, on top of that, I mean, you have to think about your non-wind days, your
Yeah.
real still days, your still mornings, right? Because now you're just thinking about thermals, and it doesn't matter what side of the ridge you're on, everything's going to drop right off the bat, right? And just example, I'll say like a north face. If you're hunting a north face and there's any kind of creek at the bottom, any kind of source of water, obviously your thermals are pulling downhill pretty hard, right? But at that point, you also have to take into consideration if you're hunting below a trail and any kind of breeze does happen to pick up. Well, now you have to know what direction that deer is coming from in a morning setting. Because, and if, yeah, so on your north face, thermals drop. And if you have a wind coming from the side, either way, now you need to know what direction the deer is actually coming from.
Yeah.
So if you're
Yeah.
in the north face and a deer's coming from the east, you don't want a west wind. You know what I mean? Now you're blowing it in his face.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's so situational, like I said, but there's always just those little things that are good to think about, right?
Yeah. It goes back to our original, like, private conversations that there is no real prescription. And
Mm-hmm.
so think about the thermal one just on a real basic level. What do you always hear? Like, well, thermals rise in the morning, drop in the evening. Well, go set up on that. What time are they rising in the morning, though? Like, you know, I've gone in there like based off of that information and not having a firm understanding. And the reason why I didn't have a firm understanding is because I was lazy and didn't try to figure it out. Right. I just listened to a podcast and thought, okay, or saw it on TV. And thought, okay, I'm gonna do that. Go rushing into a spot and I'm checking thermals and they're pulling down to like 10:30 in the morning, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
the deer that I'm hunting are coming from the bottom and I'm blowing them out the whole time. And I'm thinking, where's my rising thermals? Well, I'm on the side where the sun's not hitting that side of that edge yet. You know, it's going to be way later than, and so it's not a prescription. You have to apply it to the
Right.
situation and the topography and all of that. So I say all that to go out there and learn and don't be afraid to mess it up as long as you're learning, as long as you're asking questions, because now you're going to have a firmer understanding and how to prescribe it to your situation. It's so important. You cannot just, you know, step one, step two, step three, this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
good.
And a lot of times, those bucks don't even like to move into their bedding area until the winds pick up.
Yeah.
I had this happen to me just this past season. I was hunting a scrape on top of a ridge that I was on the north side of the scrape, and there was no wind, so my thermals were coming down. I was on the downwind side of the scrape for the thermal, and I had a thicket to my left. But as soon as that west wind picked up and started hitting me in the left side of the face, that's when that buck come out of that thicket. He was going over. He was switching from the west side to the east side so that
Yep.
he had that bedding set up. You know, he
Yeah.
waited. It was like 9 o'clock in the morning is when that west wind picked up, and that's when he finally made a move over to cross the ridge.
Yeah. I mean, I had the same thing happen to me last year. It was just later in the day, but same exact thing happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and those, you know, I mean, that's probably a higher level technique is to actually consider some of that if you're looking at your forecast and knowing that, hey, I'm gonna have a little bit later movement and I might be able to get in on this buck right now. You know, usually he's in bed by now, but you know, with a still day like this and the wind picking up a little bit later, he may even shift bedding too. That's what happened to me. Is he was shifting from one wind that was predominant all day long until a little bit past midday, and it switched and was moving to that bed that was conducive for that wind.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a opportunities for you right there just by
Yeah.
paying attention to the weather. Yep, or the
Yep.
wind.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways, man. Like I could pick up 15 different racks in here, and I could tell you I've killed them all a different way, right?
I love
Like
it. That's the
I
point.
don't know if you
Yeah.
can if you can see this one. This is that non-typical I killed in like 2000, I guess 16. That buck I killed him on a tailwind, but the tailwind when it was hit me in the face, the deer come by 15 yards from the tree, but all the other deer that got past me bust me, right?
Yeah.
But all I needed was him to walk by, and as soon as he walked by, I shot him right off the side of the tree before he got behind me.
Yeah.
It's just you got to mix that aggressiveness with your highest opportunity, I
Hmm.
guess.
Oh, I love that. Mix that aggressiveness with your highest opportunity. That is awesome. Actually, you should put that on a shirt, man. That's a good one. All right. So I've kept you for a long time. Is there anything that you wanted to say that I didn't give you an opportunity to say today?
Oh, I don't think specifically. I mean,
Go.
I think we had a good conversation. When I
Yeah,
could sit here and keep talking if we had time all day.
I could too. I really could. And I'd love to have you back on later on. I think this was a fun conversation. It's probably
Absolutely.
playing in my head. It's something that, you know, people are probably gonna have to listen to a couple times to get all of the nuggets out of it. So really awesome, man. I appreciate it. I gotta tell you, just I think you're a phenomenal teacher. I love that you're putting out those clips on Instagram. Where can people find you to find some of this information that you're putting out there?
Pretty much everything is just on my Instagram. I don't use Facebook much. I debated making a YouTube channel. That still might happen at some point, but it's not in the works just yet. But Instagram is Unleash the Weist.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. I obviously, if you're listening to this, go ahead and follow him on that. I'm learning just about every time he puts something out, so I really appreciate it.
I
And
appreciate that, man.
I'm serious, and I'll definitely throw another invite out to you. And can't thank you enough for coming on here.
Yep, I don't know if anybody learns anything, but I like making them.
They do. I learn. I learn. So, all right, everybody. Well, that's a wrap, and we thank you for coming out and taking a seat on the mat. We'll be back next Thursday with another whitetail master breaking down some other good tips. So we'll see you then. Thanks. Well, that is a wrap here on the Mobile Hunters Dojo. We're going to drop a new podcast every Thursday at 5 a.m. Do us a favor. Go give us a follow over at Instagram at the Mobile Hunters Dojo. Also, if you could leave us a 5-star review at Spotify or Apple Podcasts, it helps us out a lot. Thanks a lot. We look forward to seeing you again back here at the Mobile Hunters Dojo.